Hey everyone, it's Nate doing another P2K in New Mexico. Actually, this time a P4K. I'm attempting to summit Mount Taylor. I actually think it'll be a pretty easy bag. The only thing that'll kind of slow me up, I think, is if there's potentially snow or ice on the trail, but I don't even really expect to see much of that. As you saw, I'm at the Gooseberry Springs Trailhead, which is kind of the more classic but longer route up the mountain. So let's get going and we'll talk about this peak. So like I said, I'm at the Gooseberry Springs Trailhead, or was just there, and it is one of the most classic hikes in New Mexico from everything I've read. I've never summited Mount Taylor before. This is my first time doing it, and there are pretty much two primary routes up Mount Taylor. One is Gooseberry Springs. The other is to drive up to the saddle just below La Mosca Lookout, which La Mosca Lookout is kind of like a slightly shorter sub-peak just to the north of Mount Taylor. And I've actually driven up to the La Mosca Lookout before. I don't know why. Can't really remember why I didn't just summit Mount Taylor while I was there. It's maybe a 2-mile round trip from the saddle. I think it might have been getting late in the day, but figured, well, this is supposed to be one of the classic New Mexico hikes, and I've already been to La Mosca Lookout. Let me do Gooseberry Springs, give it a go, even though it's about 6 miles as opposed to 2. This is supposed to be one of the better kept trails to a P2K. It's pretty popular, especially for people who live in Albuquerque. It's really not that far from there. The road was in pretty good shape, I'll say that. Certainly don't think four-wheel drive or particularly high clearance was necessary. I mean, obviously, you know, wouldn't drive like a Maserati down the road, something that close to the ground, but standard sedan, I think would get by just fine on that road. Obviously not during winter. I wouldn't really do that road if there was snow on the ground in winter in a sedan. But I originally kind of thought of doing this as a trail run, but you might even hear my voice. I don't know if I'm sick, allergies, or I think more likely than those two is just the smoke from all the fires in New Mexico. So if you don't know, hopefully by the time this video airs in a couple weeks, those fires will be put out. But I find that very unlikely looking at the weather forecast. Unfortunately, in my neck of the woods, there are two very large fires burning. The Cerro Pelado fire on the Jemez, which I got a pretty early start in the morning, left about 4:45, and on my drive down to Albuquerque, I could see the red glow of the fire in the Jemez, and that's just sad. The other fire, which is the combo Hermit's Peak, Cook's Peak fire, that fire is just raging really badly. Wildfire season is a pretty depressing season here in New Mexico. As you've seen in many of my videos, there's a lot of burn scar in this state, and when fires as big as Cerro Pelado and Hermit's Peak, Cook's Peak start raging, is very depressing, knowing that those areas will never be the same in my lifetime. I mean, for instance, there are several videos I have in the Hermit's Peak area that if you were to go back to that area a year from now, it would look starkly different because it's been completely burned. So very sad. So the last thing I want this channel to become is an outlet for me to self-aggrandize and to morally chastise people. But I will say, you know, if you live in a state with wildfire potential, and the fire restrictions are in effect, please, especially as we're getting close to Memorial Day weekend, please don't do stupid stuff. I know people who watch my channel aren't the type of people who would have fires during fire restriction or light off fireworks, but maybe you know somebody who would, and it's a really big deal. I mean, if another fire, I mean, right now, think about the Hermit's Peak, Cook's Peak fire. There are crews from California, other states there. If more fires in the Southwest start, that's just going to draw resources from an already pretty resource bare effort. So unfortunately, Memorial Day weekend tends to be the start of a few fires, mostly because people ignore fire restrictions and have campfires or light off fireworks or things like that. So again, please forgive me for the moral pleas. I don't want to do that very often, but I am pretty worried for what the situation will be like a couple weeks from now. See if there's any water in this ditch. The Continental Divide Trail does run along the slopes of Mount Taylor. I cannot remember if it goes by the Gooseberry Springs Trail. My guess is no, unless the blue diamond is a CDT marker. But the answer to the question is no. There's no water in this ditch. So I know that there's supposed to be 2 springs on this route, but I have no idea if they're reliable. Okay, so it looks like we cut left here. Yep, there's the trail sign right here. Mount Taylor, 2 miles. This trail is pretty well kept. It's like a luxury for me. If you see my channel, you see the type of trails I typically do. If there is one, this is pretty awesome. And Mount Taylor, I think I mentioned before, it's a P4K. It's got over 4,000 feet of prominence. I think it's something like 2 or 3 on the New Mexico prominence list. It's a very cool peak. I mean, really, it is kind of the symbol of Western New Mexico, or at least central Western New Mexico. It's, you know, easily the tallest mountain in the area. I mean, it's over 11,000 feet, when most typical mountains in this area don't even really get above like 8,000. So it's a very cool mountain. You can see it from so many places. I mean, I feel like if you go back and watch some of my New Mexico P2K videos, you'll see that almost every mountain I can see Mount Taylor. It is very cool. From Albuquerque, if you're an Albuquerque local, you can see it. You can see its east face, which from that angle, especially in winter, it looks like this jagged, intimidating, iconic peak. And in reality, I think it's just a chance of silhouette, and it's really not very jagged or rugged in the sense of you don't need to scramble to the top or anything. But it's a very iconic peak that you can see from so many places. You can see it from Santa Fe, not from most of the city, but like if you're driving I-25, especially close by the Old Pecos Trail exit, you can get a pretty good view of it from the northeast. So it's again, a cool peak. Lots of cool history that I'll get into a little bit later. You could probably make several videos on the history and mythology surrounding Mount Taylor, but that's for somebody else to do. Of course, Mount Taylor, a very historic peak, as I was saying before. It's I think its Navajo name is, forgive me for pronunciation, Tsoodził, something like that. And of course, in their cosmology, it's the sacred mountain of the south. I believe it's associated with turquoise. And you know, I'm not an anthropologist, nor am I Navajo, so there's a lot of cool mythology around this peak that I really recommend you Google, look up, and read about it yourself, because it's a very significant peak. I believe other cultures also view the peak as sacred. I think the Spanish name for it was Cebolleta, or Onion Mountain. And maybe it's named after Zachary Taylor. I can't quite remember that. But it is got a lot of cool history, which it deserves for being such a significant peak in this part of the state. It's opening up a little bit, getting some views of the peak as we're going. think this is actually the highest summit I've done all year, if I remember correctly. The previous highest was probably San Mateo Mountain. I don't think I've eclipsed 11,000 yet this year. So that's gonna be pretty cool. Hopefully the fires subside. I don't know if they will, and already pretty much half the Santa Fe National Forest is closed. But hopefully fires subside and I can start hitting some of the 12ers in the Pecos and in northern New Mexico up by Taos, because those I think are the real gems of this state, at least the northern half of it. I was originally going to pair this summit with a drive and short summit of Cerro de Alejandro, which is the McKinley County high point. Not very impressive, but from everything I've heard, the drive is pretty rough. But unfortunately, some things came up and I need to be back home by like 5. So I don't know how long it would take me to get to Cerro de Alejandro and back onto the highway, but I assume if I did that, I would not be home by 5, unfortunately. So who knows if I'll ever do that peak, because it's so far out of the way. It's really not close to anything. And that's saying something for New Mexico, because I've been to some pretty remote peaks and still find my way to get to them. Of course, I finally took the time to turn around. Look at the view behind me. It's very beautiful. That might be Alegres Mountain right there, but I won't know for sure until I get a little higher up. So I was wrong. That's not Alegres Mountain. This is. In the background. Because of the haze, can't see it very well, but I think that's Tsoodził Mountain right there. I'll have to consult Peak Finder. There are a lot of fires down here too. I think there's 1 or 2 in the Gila, 1 in the San Mateo Mountains, which technically these are the San Mateo Mountains, but there's another San Mateo range where the Apache Kid Wilderness is, and the Withington Mountains in that area. There's a fire there, several fires in Arizona. So unfortunately, New Mexico is getting pretty bathed with smoke right now, and unfortunately that might obscure a lot of views from the summit. But so far I think it's a pretty nice view to the southwest. And then starting with Alegres Mountain, which is kind of like right behind this tree. This is beautiful view sweeping to the south and southeast. It's definitely that tall one right there in the center of the shot is South Baldy, the Magdalenas. And then that sharp one to the left is Ladrones. So that's my goal. It looks really far away, but I know I'm probably less than a mile. Geologically speaking, Mount Taylor is a pretty cool peak too. It's the remnants of a supervolcano, and I think typical estimates have the height of it being around 16,000 feet until it erupted. And you can kind of see, we'll probably see better from the summit, but this whole bowl shape just got blown out. And this whole side of the state is known for its volcanism, volcanic activity historically. I mean, El Malpais, just to the south of here, is basically one giant lava field. Lots of ice caves, which are caused by volcanic activity. Lots of volcanic plugs to the northeast of Mount Taylor, you know, Capizón Peak being the most famous of them. So it's kind of the whole Rio Grande Valley. It's the west side of the Rio Grande Valley is all volcanic
Because basically what happened is well, I'm not a geologist, so take this with a grain of salt, but the western side of the plates are pulling apart, which I guess exposes the area to more volcanic activity, and then the eastern side gets pushed up, which creates the chain of jagged mountains that stretch from the Sandias down to all the way down to El Paso. Really, they're not necessarily contiguous, but there's a pretty what do they call it, a cordillera. All right, we are reaching the summit. Hike wasn't too bad. Hike was pretty, I mean, technically super easy. There's some steep spots. I mean, I can barely breathe right now because of my cold or whatever allergy smoke. And I really didn't have to stop very much for breath or anything. So I guess that maybe gives you an idea of the difficulty of it if you're concerned about that. Really though, very nice trail. I could not be more happier with the state of this trail. It was such an easy hike compared to everything I've done so far in 2022. And there it is. This has a lot of ascents. I think it's like the second or third most ascended summit on the prominence list. Maybe even fourth. I mean, Sandia Crest is obviously the most, and then Wheeler Peak, and surprisingly Mount Baldy is really high up there. I think mostly because of the Boy Scouts. But I'll shut up now. You can join me as we officially summit Mount Taylor. Heck yeah. Well, it's surprisingly relatively calm on the summit. I think as the wind is coming out of the northwest and those trees kind of block it. But let me turn you around and show you the view from up here. I mean, we can see a lot with the exception of kind of towards the northwest, but I'm going to try to angle a little bit to get that view. This is looking pretty much straight west, maybe a little west-southwest. See, this was the route I pretty much came up. I probably parked somewhere down there and made my way up here. You can see the trail maybe down there. See it winding down. So this, I was wrong before. I was pointing to the wrong area. This is kind of like the bowl that supposedly the summit was going up higher and then would be above us here another 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 feet, something like that. You see there's some kind of structure down there. I think that's called Water Canyon. It's private property. I already pointed out this area. We got South Baldy, Ladrones, the desert peaks that are on White Sands property. There's the Manzanos straight ahead, way back there. Manzano Peak on the right. Bosque Peak somewhere out there. Of course, the Sandias, Sandia Crest dead center. To the left of that, right there. Placer Mountain, which made an appearance on this video, or on this channel. Here, kind of not in the foreground, obviously the foreground is still Mount Taylor. You see all these like volcanic plugs, and the lighting is amazing right now. I gotta love that. And that's part of that like volcanic field I was telling you about. And it's a pretty remote area out there. I think the CDT kind of goes through there. And there's Cabazon right there with the Jemez behind it. It's probably Redondo Peak we're looking at. And then you can unfortunately, you can kind of see the smoke emanating from the Jemez and going east. Pretty unfortunate. And then here in the foreground, you can see dead center. That's La Mosca Lookout and the road going up to it. You know, I said, after being up here, this is definitely a classic hike in New Mexico. This is a cool hike. You know, if you don't live in New Mexico, maybe you're road tripping, finding yourself driving on I-40, and you're inclined to do this peak, I really recommend it. This hike is pretty cool. Certainly not an advanced summit technically. I mean, you do need to be in decent shape, but it's only 6 miles, and I think the downhill is going to be quite easy. But this view is pretty stunning. Now, La Mosca Lookout, from what I remember, has more of a 360 view, but it's also kind of cluttered with electronic equipment. So I'm going to stop, probably have a little lunch, and then see if I can get a little bit of a view towards the north. I kind of moved to the north a little bit to see if I could get a view there, but I don't really think there's going to be one. If you come here and you really want a view north, like I know that there's a view north from La Mosca Lookout, but I don't really feel like doing that right now. I've already done it. Don't want to lose the elevation. So we're going to go back up to the peak, and then we're going to head back. Again, overall, I would call this a beginner peak. I mean, it's real nice to chop that tree. But I call this a beginner peak. It's really not that difficult. The drive up here is not too bad. I had cell service pretty much the whole time, so there's that little bit of comfort. But, you know, I lived in Albuquerque for 4 years and never did this mountain, even though it's not that bad of a drive, like I said earlier. So this is one more peak. I guess I didn't bring that up. My goal for 2022 is to summit, well, finish out all the peaks above I-40, or yeah, above I-40. They're P2Ks, and this is one of them. So now I only have Truchas Peak, Costilla Peak, and Mount Phillips left. Hopefully those aren't on fire come summer. Well, I don't think there's much left to film. View is pretty stunning, but it's the same way back. So I think I'll leave you here. Thanks for joining me.